I'm David Lombardo, and this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're exploring ways to keep New Yorkers safe from dangerous drivers. And our guest is State Senate Transportation Committee Chair Jeremy Cooney, a Rochester-area Democrat. So a perennial issue here in New York, and one that's been addressed a couple times in recent budgets from the governor, is this idea of trying to create safer work zones on New York's roads, whether it's the Thruway or state-run roads or anything that we can think of. And you had some firsthand experience with this earlier in April. Can you talk about where you visited and what it was like?
Yes. Just last week was National Work Zone Awareness Week. We had the opportunity to go into one of those work zones that we see when we're on the Thruway or on State Expressway. We usually are kind of going by and peering over, what are they working on? Mm-hmm. And got to pull over and thank some of the state workers who are out there every day. And, you know, it was a surreal experience for me to kind of stand in their shoes. Obviously was wearing protective gear, but to see how fast the cars are going right by you. I mean, this isn't something where you're over 20 feet. I mean, you were right there on the road, feeling the wind go by as these large trucks go zipping by you. And it just gave me an enormous amount of gratitude for the hardworking men and women who are out there doing this work. But it also underscored, to your point, the need to increase some of our safety measures in these species. Quite frankly, the numbers speak for themselves. Hundreds of work site crashes where people are crashing into work zones every year. I think last year we had upwards of 60 actual injuries to workers, and unfortunately we had 2 deaths last year. So this is only getting worse, and I think the big culprit, of course, is distracted driving. We've got more drivers looking at their phones. You know, these cars nowadays are actually computers themselves, so there's buttons to push and knobs to turn, and all of a sudden you're taking your eyes off the road and you're going 50, 60, 70 miles, maybe even more on some of these roads, and you could kill someone. It's awful.
Well, did you get any feedback from the workers that you talked to about what they think is effective or the level to which they're concerned about this? Because I have to imagine their appetite for a vehicle passing by at 55 miles an hour is probably different than you or I, who would probably only feel safe if the car's going like 5 to 6 miles an hour.
Absolutely. Actually, I asked them a couple of questions. One, I said, can you tell how fast the vehicle is going generally, just based on your experience out there? And they said, we can tell someone going 55, which is what most work zone speed limits are, versus someone going, 80 plus. And they said most people are going 80 plus. They're not stopping. So they can feel that. And I also asked them, what's the craziest thing you've seen drivers do? You just kind of let them kind of fill in the blanks. It's pretty horrifying. Right? People, again, this is not, some town or city street where people are kind of going 15, 20 miles per hour in their car. These are people going on a controlled highway, 55 plus, doing makeup. I don't even know how you would do that. Not paying attention at all, drinking beverages, rolling down their window and yelling things at the workers when they're going
words
by.
Of support?
I don't think that they were words of gratitude. So this is what I always remind people. We spend a lot of time here in Albany talking about budgets and putting more resources into improving our roads. I've been talking about potholes, as you know, making sure that we are trying to find ways to prevent potholes from occurring and to fix them faster. So when we actually send these people out to do the work that we ask them to do, we are treating them horribly. We are putting their lives at risk. We are finding more increased assault instances where people are, not only yelling things, but throwing things at these workers. So there's a number of bills I wanted to highlight. One is this speeding violations. Right now, you can get a ticket, obviously, if you're going past a work zone and there's a camera that's in place. My legislation actually increases that ticket. I think we really have to change the culture of driving and really change the incentive for people to follow our state laws. I also have a bill called the Move Over Bill. You know that when you see a ambulance or a state trooper on the side of the road, you're supposed to get into the other lane depending on what lane you're in. We have a bill that would actually increase the penalty for failing to move over when legally required to do so. But, I think at the end of the day, drivers are going to continue to blow through our state rules unless there's a consequence. And so probably one of the most important bills and difficult bills, as you know, David, is I want to increase the penalty for actually assaulting these workers. We've created legislation that would create a felony offense. And, that's very difficult to pass in Albany. We don't want it to add punishments, but I think we are at the point where we need to have a stricter penalty for New Yorkers who choose to abuse our state workers.
And we've seen similar bills actually get adopted as it pertains to, say, mass transit workers.
That's right.
But before we move on, let me reintroduce you. For listeners just joining us, I'm David Lombardo, and this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're speaking with Senate Transportation Committee Chair Jeremy Cooney, a Rochester-area Democrat. You referred to those speed cameras, which they can implement a civil penalty if they catch you. You don't get points on your license because it's a whole thing about who's actually seeing you do this. We've seen an expansion of how those are deployed. Is there any reason not to just have them at all work zones? I understand maybe logistically that could be a challenge, but why not just put them everywhere?
Well, part of it is staffing, right? That we have cameras which are unstaffed, but then you have to review the footage, right? And then bill the footage and make sure that you can defend the footage if you are in a court situation. So part of it is the ability of us to actually fully commit to doing the program the way it was intended to do. That said, I think technology is changing very quickly, that we have more options. We did vote as a legislative body to increase the number of cameras last legislative session. This year, there is a proposal by the governor, which I am supporting, which would increase the type of roads that they could be placed on, state-controlled highways, could go also into uncontrolled highways. So, I think that's a step in the right direction. But I think people are, at least people I speak to, are noticing that there are these signs and new kind of behavior. One thing I've tried to do on my own, as you know, I spend a lot of time on our state roads, is I get into the left-hand lane when I'm in a speed zone, and I purposely go 55 miles per hour, which drives every car behind me insane.
I was going to say that is not appropriate under the unspoken rules of the road.
We want to make sure that we are setting the example. We don't want people going 55 miles per hour in the right-hand lane and people zipping by in 80 miles per hour in the left-hand lane. Again, you're still endangering our state workers. And so these work zones are not that large, right? So if it takes you an extra minute and a half, it's well worth it to save a life. So I think speeding is going to be a topic for this legislative session. As you know, the governor put in some legislation into her executive budget around what we call super speeders. This was in part based on the good work of my colleague, Senator Gennardis, who has been pushing legislation to create a super speeders program, which would allow intelligent speed reduction technology, say that 5 times fast, to be put into vehicles if you are a chronic speeder, meaning that you have multiple offenses of speeding, and it would be administered by the DMV, and you would have to kind of go through a process where your car would be installed here, and you wouldn't be able to go over the speed limit. Period, full stop. And the governor put a proposal in for just New York City. I am, vehement that I think we should keep people safe wherever you are in the state of New York, and I think that we should expand that statewide, and Senator Gennardis' bill is statewide. The Senate supported in our one-house budget, Senator Gennardis' version of the bill, which would have a statewide application. I understand why the governor looked at New York City only because there's more cameras, more infrastructure in place to administer the program. I still think that there's some modifications we can do to make this a statewide program to reduce speeds.
What sort of pushback, if any, do you get when you talk about that type of legislation? Because it has not moved through the assembly. This is not a new concept, as you talked about. So what is the option, and how much credit do you give the opposition?
what I usually hear in terms of opposition, in addition to not trusting the technology itself, is...
Do you think that's a good faith argument?
No.
Okay.
No. I think what the fair argument is these cameras find the vehicle, not find the driver.
Mm-hmm.
So what I mean is, if you see a vehicle that's been caught on a camera speeding for a certain amount of times, it might be different drivers each time. And how do you hold the driver accountable versus hold the vehicle owner accountable? Or maybe there needs to be joint accountability there. If you keep on lending your car to someone who is driving really fast.
That's a good point.
So that's a fair policy consideration. I think our answer to that is maybe tying these infractions to the registration. So, there's different kind of ways to work around it. But I think the key part is these technologies, speed limiter technologies, has been shown to reduce traffic deaths by 37%. That's the real number. I think it changes again if you go through the process. You have one of these technologies installed on your vehicle, like the interlock ignition device, which we could talk about also. It changes your driver behavior. And so when you get rid of this device, you're a better driver for it. And you're more aware of your surroundings and hopefully can save lives.
And lastly on this point, I want to come back to when this would apply, because there might be listeners who think, oh boy, over the course of my lifetime, I've had a handful of speeding tickets. This is not who this is going to apply to. This is the person with speeding after speeding after speeding after speeding after speeding violation, right?
And consistently and consecutively, right? Not something where, I got a ticket when I was 16, then I got a ticket when I was 24, and now I got a ticket when I'm 45, and now I'm out, right? No, it's the bill language differs between Senator Gennardis' bill and Governor Hochul's language, but it's basically the number of points you have on your license, 11 points within 24 months, or you've received 6 or more speed camera or red light camera violations over the course of a 12-month period. I mean, that's a significant amount of bad behavior on our roads. And again, you may have been lucky not to have hurt someone in all those infractions, but it only takes one to ruin a life.
And after a quick break, we'll continue our conversation with State Senate Transportation Committee Chair Jeremy Cooney, a Rochester-area Democrat. Support for the Capitol Press Room comes from O'Donnell & Associates, a public affairs firm providing strategic guidance to businesses and nonprofits on navigating policy and regulatory issues. More information is available at o'donnellsolutions.com. I'm David Lombardo, and this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're continuing our discussion about ways to make New York roads safer from dangerous drivers with State Senate Transportation Committee Chair Jeremy Cooney, a Rochester-area Democrat. I want to come back to the issue of speed cameras, and we talked earlier about having them deployed in work zones. We're seeing them deployed more broadly around cities, both in school zones as well as at red light cameras, and there are two schools of thought on these. One, it's accountability. It's ensuring that people have a reason to slow down in these areas. The second is money, and that municipalities are just seeing these as revenue raisers and don't really care about the safety concerns. How do we ensure that these are deployed in a meaningful way moving forward, and that it's not just about catching people who are going 30 miles an hour in a school zone as opposed to 25?
Yes, there is some revenue raising capacity here, but let's be very honest and true about this. This is about saving lives. I have talked to town supervisors, I've talked to city mayors around implementation, and this always comes down to a staffing issue. The ability of local municipalities to have road patrols that are, actively monitoring, sensitive areas like school zones, or we know, entrances to on-ramps into state highways, right, often go very fast. I see that in my own community in the city of Rochester. We don't have the police, trooper, sheriff personnel to monitor speed the way that it needs to be, especially as we've seen since the pandemic, an increase in speeding and distracted driving. So cameras become part of the solution to actually the enforcement side. Without the enforcement, people are going to continue to have this bad behavior. Again, changing the culture of driving requires punishment and a penalty for bad behavior. And so cameras are that solution in the absence of having robust road patrols that we can think about from the 1980s and 1970s, right, where that was a big part of it. I'm just thinking about all the videos and movies that we watched growing up with with these road patrol officers. So, I think that's a big part of it. I think we did some good work around school bus stop arm cameras in the last couple of legislative sessions, right? There was an incident right here in the Capital District a couple of weeks ago where a driver was not only speeding by a yellow school bus, that driver chose to drive on the right-hand side of the bus, right where the doors open and little kids get outside the bus. The student, walked off the bus. 3 seconds later, a car goes zipping by. It was all caught on this stop arm camera. I mean, talk about a miracle that child did not lose his life. But that's the kind of driving behavior that we see. There are thousands of tickets in New York State from Long Island to the Hudson Valley to Rochester that have gone unadjudicated. So these are tickets that were issued by the technology that local governments have opted into that have not been adjudicated. So that's what we're working on right now. This session is to make sure that there's a place so that the courts have to hear, or the DMV has to hear and hold these tickets accountable.
Well, let's turn to a perennial issue, the idea of trying to address repeated drunk drivers. And you have a bill dealing with ignition interlock devices, and this is supposed to create a stronger or more aggressive framework than what we have right now. Who are you looking to cover with this pending legislation that you have with the Capital Region's Carrie Warner?
Yes, and she's been a great advocate. The Assembly member and I amended the bill to make some changes that I think we can improve the program on Leandra's Law. So this was a law that passed a number of years ago that would require those who are convicted of a DWI to install one of these ignition interlock devices, IIDs. And this is what you blow into to start your car, right? And the idea is you would install it on your vehicle, you would have it for a certain period of time, and then you get it off, and you'd be able to start driving again, have your full license again. The problem is no one's putting them in. Only 25% of people who are given the directive by the court to install these IIDs actually install them. The reason why is because if you can get rid of your car, you can say, "Oh, I don't own a vehicle," or if you live in New York City, you might be borrowing a friend's vehicle, right, and you don't have your own, so you never install them, which means you never learn that behavior modification. And so our legislation says you must install these devices, and don't worry about the cost because there's programs to help pay for them depending on your household income. But you must install them, and you must use them consecutively for 6 months. So the idea is that you learn a behavior. Now, if you don't consume any alcohol and you're not driving and inebriated in any way, then that's great. You've gone for a period of time, you've maybe learned your lesson here, and you don't want to do it again. Or if you struggle with addiction, alcohol addiction, which it is an addiction, it is a disease, and you struggle with it, you learn, you know what, I can't drive right now, and you have that experience. So we've tried to close the loophole here, and again, the numbers speak for themselves. Only 25% of drivers ordered to install an IAD device actually installed it. That's not working. But we also know that for people who do install it, we reduce the incidences of DWIs upwards of 70%. So save lives. We all hear these horrific stories. This is especially the case, in busy parts of the state where they have a number of people commuting between large cities and towns. You see this on Long Island. It happens, unfortunately, all too often. And we've had great support from groups like MAD and SAD, and so many advocates come together and say New York could do better. And again, this is technology that's available to save lives. Let's just utilize that technology.
Well, lastly, I want to come back to the idea of education and making sure that people are aware of all of these changes in the landscape and what we expect of drivers, because I took a road test. I had to take a practical exam when I got my permit, but nothing else is expected of me to maintain my driver's license. And I wonder whether there's a case to be made for some sort of continuing driver's education, because there can be so many promos and so many ads for this and so many transportation chairs coming on radio shows to tell people about laws and proposed laws. But unless people are forced to try to stay up on this, I don't think you're going to. So is that something that you think we should be considering, or is that just not practical given the norms around driving?
No, it's certainly not the first time I've heard that. I mean, I come from a profession where you take continuing legal education, right, on a regular basis, and my wife's a physician. She takes continuing medical education, right? We know that that's of value, right, to keep up to date with the latest changes and newest technologies, and there's value to that. It's harder when you have a larger population, and New York has a large driver population. So to administer that and to enforce that would be difficult, but not impossible. I think the closest thing we have is when you go in to renew your license, every once in a while you have to take an eye exam. Like, that's a good thing.
Sure.
But, maybe we can take it to the next level where every 10 years or some milestone marker, there is some sort of component, whether it's written or some sort of evaluation of your driving record of some level by the state. Again, the idea is driving is a privilege. We all depend on it, especially if you live outside of New York City, where you don't have a robust of a public transit system. We know that cars are important to get to work or to pick up your kid from school, but at the end of the day, it's still a privilege to be able to drive. And these are vehicles that are going much faster. They're much larger. And when they are involved in an accident, the consequences are much more severe. So we have a responsibility to keep New Yorkers safe, and working with the DMV, working with our team and the codes team here at the Senate, we want to make sure that we want to look at, again, finding that balance between policies and penalties to help keep New Yorkers safe.
Well, we've been speaking with State Senate Transportation Committee Chair Jeremy Cooney. He's a Rochester-area Democrat. Senator, thanks for making the time.
Thanks for having me on. Drive safe.
Support for the Capitol Press Room is provided by New York State United Teachers, a statewide union of nearly 700,000 professionals in education and healthcare.